habitat particularly for nature. And so Ferrers' short talk is one of several. We hope they'll be seen as a sort of package. He's going to talk about woodland, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a very broad subject, woodland, to be given. There's so many different angles one could pursue, and I think in 15 minutes it would be nice just to look at the tension between woodland and perhaps farmland on the Lizard Peninsula, and try and work out what we've got, why we've got it, what we should do about it, and what we should be doing in the future. Fortunately, the lizard is very well researched for its woodland history. The Doomsday Book is really quite fascinating about 17,000 acres of farmland in production on the Lizard Peninsula, and that is roughly what it is now. By deducing that, you can then see that the woodland patterns are very much where they have been all along on the eastern and southern side of the Lizard Peninsula. And even going earlier than that, going back to the charters of the 1970s, you can record the boundaries of woodlands and fields and moor. They were written in Latin. I think they're at the Diocese of Exeter they're kept. Oliver Rackham translated them. And you can see the waymarking stones, the standing stones, which define the difference between the moorland and on our side, on the southern side, the woodlands. The history of farming around Goonhilly is very, very important in the history of the woodland. And there were these farms like Rosuick, like Arizzi, like Trenoon, which were spiral farms, where the farms started small and spiraled like a nautilus, claiming more and more land from the moor side, both travelling larger fields for grazing on the moor and smaller fields in the centre. But really, going back even further, Oliver Rackham felt that the Ice Age, about 12,000 years ago, he felt that the history of the woodlands on the Lizard is the story of oakland development, oak woodlands throughout the whole country. And one of the things that if you grow trees on the Lizard, I think you're very, very familiar that if you leave a field alone, natural regeneration will produce the species, but predominantly oak, very, very rapidly. There have been lots of new studies on the benefit of the mycorrhizal populations which support oak woodlands. There are pioneer species which will claim land back, and I think you probably all know the story of the jay taking the acorn and dropping it, and then the mycorrhizal population from the local woodland travelling out to that acorn to help it germinate and establish itself. But really what I want to come back to is how on earth should we manage our woodlands? And there is this idea that just planting trees is a good thing. And I really want to try and put that in some context, some more context, because of course the farming community of the Lizard has to survive and produce food for us. Just pressurising farmers to plant trees is not a very sensible or refined approach. Personally, I think we don't manage the existing woods we have well enough. And I think really more time should be spent understanding what we've got and how to protect what we've got. And there are various ways we can do that. There have been a lot of studies, but really I think the basis we could come to is understanding a community project where we could take and look at the species we think are important and grow them at a nursery centralised on the Lizard Peninsula somewhere. So we could bring those species in. We did bring some oats which have just germinated from acorns, but it is the easiest thing in the world to grow oats from acorns. But we want to argue about and discuss what other species are relevant to the history of the woodlands on the Lizard. There's the issue about diseases at the moment. I think we have 20 current tree diseases within our woodlands in Cornwall, and we are aware of 11 more which are approaching us. We were discussing the oak processionary moth, which is in the home counties at the moment, killing oak trees. Given the importance of the oak genetics on the Lizard Peninsula, we really should be protecting ourselves and protecting our gene history of the oaks here on the Lizard. And once again, I think a nursery where all of us can collect and prioritise what we're preserving for replanting would be a very sensible route, rather than just trying to plant new ground all the time. We must protect the genetic history of the trees that we've got. And then there's the issues of climate change and the issues of what species that are good to plant. At the moment, I don't think there is any sensible policy or guidance about which trees are being planted on the peninsula. There's obviously a friction between what is forestry and the remnants of the post-war forestry you see as you drive across Goonhilly Downs with the pine trees which are there. They are of importance now, but they're not the original story. There was a rumour, as I said, that there used to be a forest on Goonhilly, but there's no evidence to support that at all. All of the woodlands are in the river valleys which run from the central down to the sea. So what about the chestnut, which we have on the Lizard, which grows really, really well, Castanea sativa, which is a nursery on the peninsula, collecting our sweet chestnut, which grows extremely well down here. What about sycamore? How do people feel about sycamore? Are there lovers of sycamore? That's another Roman intervention, and it is becoming rapidly the dominant tree on the Lizard. And really, I think we should be thinking about the consequences of that. So really it's just trying to prioritise what we need to protect the genetic history of what we've got, to enable people on the Lizard to plant with some form of proper strategy and policy. I don't know if we've got the NGOs in the room from the English Nature here earlier. Natural English. On planting. I have to say that the Lizard, I was very fortunate to be taught by a guy called Oliver Rackham. Some of you may have come across Oliver. He's long gone now, but he wrote The Ancient Woodlands of the Halford River, The History of the Countryside, Trees and Woodlands of the British Landscape. He used to get off a train at Truro and bicycle to Truro and to the Halfords and study the trees there. And he had the belief that the woodlands of the Halford River may have been immediately post-glacial, but they are secondary woodlands. We think they were planted to support the charcoal and smelting operations of the medieval period. Originally, he thought, particularly around the higher reaches of the Halford, we had some ancient woodlands surviving there, which some of you will be aware of. And the indicators there are probably service trees. I don't know what's left there. But once again, it's an incredibly valuable genetic stock that needs to be protected. So my understanding of conservation really is to fully understand what we've got in our woodlands before we lose things from planting the wrong tree. So we must record what we've got and record its history. And Oliver Rackham has done a lot of that work for us. He occasionally got it wrong. There's a funny story. He came to Truro and he measured the woodland trees for their age, the ones which fall over and suck and form stools, by the size of the stool. The lime trees will go on growing forever. And he came to the series, he measured the stool of the lime tree by Truro and he said that, oh gosh, that's got to be almost pre-glacial, it was so big. And he had this theory that there was remnants of ancient pre-glacial woodland on the peninsula. What he hadn't factored in is the wonderful fact of the Lizard, because it's so mild, things grow so much quicker. And exponentially the stools of the lime tree, the upside down flowering lime tree, had grown massive in about 200, 300 years. But I remember the conversation with Oliver, and I said, well, Oliver, this is very strange that they're planted exactly 200 yards apart. It seems to me there's an avenue. Yeah, but these aren't actually from the original forest. But he was very keen that the resource in the far west, the tree resource, the woodland resource in the far west, particularly the Lizard Peninsula, which he loved, was the originator of a lot of our oak history in the UK. Many of the trees came across the land bridge to the east of the country after the Ice Age, but he firmly believed, and I like to believe, that the oak woodlands, what used to be called Western oak woodlands, originates here on the Lizard Peninsula. It's now been romantically promoted to Western temperate rainforest, which is a much more romantic title, and a lot of people have climbed into that as an identity. But notwithstanding that, oaks support nearly 2,500 species of plants and animals, and I suspect we have much more predominant oaks here on the Lizard Peninsula. And then, if we were to examine that a bit more and think about climate change, we can look at oak trees which come from Central Europe and the Far East where they grow, but they are oak trees which we might be able to bring in, which would do very well and flourish here. And of course, oaks can coppice very well, they can pollard very well. So my gentle plea today, really, for your project is to rather than push planting so hard, is to research what we had and where it was. The balance has been the same for thousands of years. There's no great requirement to plant new areas. There are obvious drivers for that in terms of carbon sequestration and all sorts of things. But really, I think an overriding value is the perpetuation of the genetic material we've got, which is evolving to deal with climate change. I think some of the diseases we're seeing are the result of rapid movement of plants around the world through the nurseries. The Clara, the Ziana, the Canensis, they all come in and they destroy our tree crop very rapidly. But in a less globalized situation, the trees will evolve and will eventually be able to live with the diseases which are apparently killing them. I think I was just speaking to, I can't remember who it was, about the great elm of Rosuick. Are you familiar with the great elm of Rosuick? Yeah, well, it used to live just down here on the corner outside the buildings. They thought it was 400, 500, 600 years old or even older, and sadly elm disease got it. But as you all know, elms sucker really well. So a new oak tree was planted there, and you can see the oak tree, it's doing very well. But if you look around the base of it now, you'll see all the original suckers of the elm tree growing up from the bottom, with the original genetic material of that tree trying to learn how to exist in the climate with the Dutch elm disease. There are various theories around why Dutch elm exists. I have a theory about the beetle. I heard one today about it opening up of the elm bark, allowing disease to get in. I don't know what we think about the ash trees on the Lizard. They're a great tree of the Lizard Peninsula, which are now rapidly disappearing, but they're very improvident genetically. They're all slightly different, and we're hoping that there will be a survivor, one which can deal with the disease. Is it Clara? I don't remember. It's Clara in ash tree. So my message just to you is a very, very simple one. Everybody's aware of regeneration and trying to plant trees, but I find it unstructured, really. I really do, and I think it would be really... When my wife and I were in Romania, looking at woodland projects in Romania, where there's a lot of ancient woodland, and one of the models they had out there, or were pushing to achieve, was that each village would have its own tree nursery, or woodland pasture. And it really doesn't cost a lot of money to push acorns and bits and pieces into pots in the garden. So my message for you today is, if there's anything I wanted to come out today, was to consider that as a way forward.